Well, welcome everyone to episode 2 of this series for Down to Earth Month. We are celebrating all things sustainability in California wine growing, and we had such a blast last week kicking it off, diving deep into the foundational elements of what that actually means. I'm Amanda McCrossin. I'm here with Aida Mollenkamp. Together, we are exploring this very niche but broad topic. Aida, we talked about so much last week. Do
Yeah,
you want to
a
maybe give
lot.
us a little recap before we dive even deeper today into
Yeah.
sustainability, organic, and biodynamic and what all those things mean?
Yeah, let's like back up for 1 second before we go forward. Okay.
Take a
So
deep breath.
to take a deep breath, let's just remember the reason we're even doing this is because it's the 10th anniversary of Down to Earth Month. And here in California, that means we celebrate being global leaders in sustainability. And as we told you last month, about 80% of California wines are certified sustainable, made in a sustainable way these days. So like Amanda and I were saying, it's easier to find a sustainable wine than not, which is like a really nice silver lining when it comes to the green discussion.
Yes.
And just to really simply, because we're going to talk about biodynamic and organic, let's first remember what the heck is sustainable.
Yes.
So the easiest way for me to remember it, because Amanda and I are like on this journey with y'all, we're learning too. And when it was explained to me as the 3 E's, that's when it really stuck with me. So you're thinking about the environmental impact, you're thinking about economic sustainability, and you're also thinking about social equitable social measures. So that, as we were saying last week, is something that you might not think about. Community outreach, charity work, health of the employees. So that's sustainability. So now you might be wondering what the heck organic and biodynamic, how they enter, are they different? Is one better than the other? Amanda, how should I look at this? If this was a math class, are we talking a Venn diagram? Are we talking a pyramid? Are we talking a graph? Like, help me visualize this.
Well, I know math was more your strong suit than my strong suit, but I'll help you anyway.
Science, math, whatever.
Whatever. This is probably one of the most misunderstood and to that end, not the best explained out there when it comes to the difference between organic, biodynamic, and sustainable and how they can work together. And even, as we were going through learning about sustainability, I had the same question. Well, how does organic and biodynamic fit into the equation? And again, is one better than the other? Is it like a stair step of things that we should be reaching to achieve, or is it something that works a little bit more together? Because if we think about sustainability as you just described, well, sustainability is really more of a comprehensive, holistic approach to how a winery or a vineyard or both are looking at their practices to make sure that they are, environmentally sound and friendly to their employees and economically viable. So, if we think about it from a 1,000-foot view, and then we look at biodynamic and sustainable, well, it's not really a pyramid, but it is more of a Venn diagram of how they can kind of layer on top of each other. And we can see that, together they actually work toward that common goal, and they can really build up each other and improve. So I guess we should probably start with breaking down what these terms mean, because we broke down what sustainability looks like and what that all entails. And if you didn't catch last week's episode, I highly recommend after all of this today that you head back and go watch that to get more of that foundational, explanation of what we're going to be talking about today. But in terms of organic and biodynamic, Aida, do you want to kick it off with what organic means?
Sure. So, organic is something that I think causes a lot of confusion, because organic is a term we see across the agricultural spectrum. And the easiest way to remember this is that we in the United States do have this certified at a national level. And so in order for something to have that USDA organic seal, it's going to have to actually follow a set of standards that are defined by the National Organic Program. That goes back to almost 20 years now. And so it's a well-established program. And really what it takes into account is soil health and, the practices of the farm, and really looking deep into what is actually happening in terms of pesticide use and all these things. Now, here in California, we're extra, right? So we always go a little above and beyond. And so we actually created the first certified program at a state level in the United States. And what we care about in terms of that program, it's called the CCOF program. So California Certified Organic Farming. So it actually, again, applies to all the agricultural things all here in the Golden State, everybody. But when it comes to wine, what we want to think about is we are talking about the vineyards and the winery. So you cannot get the certification unless your vineyard is practicing organic things. So you think about what is the cover crop? Are there pesticides being used, right? Those kind of things, but also the winery. And Amanda and I really wanted to like pause on that for a second, because that I know for me was something, as I have started on my wine journey, you don't, sometimes, I don't mean to be rude to all the, you know, all the winemakers out there, but you sometimes forget, like, oh yeah, what happens in the winery? You always think so much about the field, right? At least I do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's another really important distinction, and one that I think causes a lot of confusion and trips people up a bit, because there is a distinction between those certifications. And more often than not, when we're talking about, when we talk about organic wine, we're not talking about organically made wine. We're talking about wine made with organic grapes. So most of the wines that we're consuming here in the US are actually not technically organic wines. They're wines made with organic grapes, because in order to be certified organic in the United States, you have to, you cannot use any additions, and that includes sulfites. And sulfites, you know, we hear sulfites, we immediately, like, our alarm bells
freak out.
People freak out. But sulfites are actually, they're not the bad guy that people have, you know, that maybe the media and marketing teams have made them out to be. They're not necessarily the things that are triggering your headaches. In fact, sulfites can be found in a wide array of foods, from like trail mix to, you know, other types of processed foods that we eat on a
even
regular
in like
basis.
Cheeses sometimes. I mean, it can be everywhere.
Exactly. So we think of sulfites as like a preservative, right? And that's probably an oversimplification to some degree, but what is happening is the sulfites are being added at the end of bottling, mostly to ensure that that wine has shelf life. So ensure that the wine isn't going to be damaged because of, you know, a little bit of temperature shift as it's being shipped across the United States or even globally. So winemakers, you know, in order to make sure that their wines taste the way that they did at bottling, you know, 6, 10, 15 years down the line, well, they're going to be adding sulfites. Any addition of that automatically negates your ability to call a wine organic or have it be certified. So that's really one of the big things that I always like to remind people, because they look at the back of the wine and you go, well, it's not organic. And I mean, here's the thing, and we're going to be talking, you know, about 3 wines today that are practicing incredible sustainability, biodynamic, and organic practices, and, you know, some or all. But, you know, I was talking to Martha from Barra, which is one of the wines that we are going to be talking about later on. Thank you. And I had asked her, because they're really good. If you go on their, I think on their website, they break down all of these certifications. And I said, you know, Martha,
there's the label, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, she said they were like number 27 in the county to be certified organic. They've been practicing. I think she said that they joke that they have been like farming organically for 50 years. They just didn't know that they were.
Yeah, totally.
So
I mean, yeah, you look at people like that are like multi-generational, like the Barra family goes back like to Europe. They probably were doing it back when they were growing grapes then. So like
exactly. And I had asked her, you know, because I was like, you know, you're doing all these things right, so to speak, in the vineyard. But, you know, what's happening at the bottling process, at the winemaking level? I said, you know, you're not certified organic. You're not a certified organic wine, but you are using certified organic grapes. So what's happening at the winemaking level? And she said, well, you know, we are as low intervention as you can get, meaning we're not adding any sort of like chemicals, any additions, anything that would fall under the inorganic category.
As my grandmother would say, none of the funny stuff is going into the wine.
None of the funny stuff. Yes. Sorry, I'm a little blurry. But she said, you know, when it comes to sulfite, she said we do add the lowest parts per million that we possibly can. So she said in most cases it's about 30 parts per million. 100 is generally like where most people are at. So she said we're always sub 100 parts per million. So it's super, super negligible when we're talking about how many sulfites are added, but it is there. And for that reason, you know, the wine cannot be called organic, but it's organic in every other way. So I think it's really important that we make that distinction when it comes to organic, that when you're talking about organic wine, most of the wines out there are using sulfites, unless you're getting into the natural wine category, which is not a category we're going to be talking about today.
No.
Most of the wines that you are seeing on your grocery shelves that you're ordering online, unless it is like a natural wine, most of those are going to have sulfites. So that's the big definition on organic. What happens?
Well, before we move on to biodynamic, I just want to say, like, just to recap, because we just told you a lot. Essentially, if you look on a label, if you look on a winery's website, the two terms you're probably going to see are made with organic grapes, which is what Amanda was telling you about, or actual certification. And so again, like, we're going to keep saying this throughout this month. Part of this is going to be, you know, I know you want to just like uncork a bottle of wine and be like, all's good in the world of sustainability and wine, but we're going to encourage you to dig a teeny bit deeper and ask when you're in the wine shop, look at the label. Like, they're doing their best. If you go to any of these wines we're going to talk about today, there is all kinds of information on their website. You can nerd out as much as you want about this. But just keeping that in your mind, that something not certified organic doesn't mean that they're not practicing organic. They just didn't take it, you know, in football terms, like they're on the 5-yard line. They just didn't take it all the way into the end zone, but there's a reason they didn't. It's not because they don't want to score.
It was a smart play.
It was a smart play. I'm going to stop pretending I know anything about football and let's talk about biodynamic.
I believe you. I'm there. Sunday football day. I feel like you know what I'm talking about.
I'm a basketball fan. I don't know why I'm talking about football right now. But biodynamic is something I think also, like, these terms all carry these stereotypes. I kind of feel bad for them. We're just like pigeonholing all of them, I think. Yes. And I think biodynamic gets written off as like a little quirky sometimes to people, right?
Little woo-woo sometimes.
Yeah. So I think the thing that really like stuck it for me, again, because I'm like very literal when it comes to definitions and things, is that biodynamic, thinking about the farm as a living organism. Okay. So the farm is like this animal you want to take care of and you want to care for and nurture. And so, Amanda, can you give us the background of, like, this has been going on, the philosophy's been around just around 100 years, right? And
yeah, I mean, I think some would argue that it's been around for a lot longer because, you know, if we look back through history, some of the principles that were adopted by, you know, modern day biodynamics, you know, have been around for so long. It really is like rooted in old ancient traditions. But biodynamics as we know it today really stems from the teachings of Rudolf Steiner, which happened in the 1920s. And then, you know, sort of has evolved through his disciples, so to speak, over the years. So really what it is, as you were saying, is if you're looking at the vineyard as an entity, as, you know, one being that, you know, has to live off of the elements that are, you know, that are present there, then you're taking into account the whole body. So like an animal or a person, we're taking into account everything that's existing. So we're not just treating the vines, we're actually treating, or so to speak, taking care of the entire environment around it. So in a lot of ways, you know, this is, as we talk about sustainability adjacent to this, so many of the things that we talked about last week in terms of like natural wildlife protection and habitat and making sure that there's, you know, healthy surrounding, a lot of that has to do with the, you know, a lot of that plays into biodynamics. And that's like one of the big crossovers in that Venn diagram that we're going to show you in a second. But essentially, you know, what happens is, you know, obviously they're not using any chemicals, but they're, you know, they're taking it a few steps further, so to speak. Maybe that's not the right terminology, but they're taking it to the point where they're actually using a lot of teas. They're using teas
like
formulate a lot of times
concoctions.
Exactly. So you know, obviously no synthetic chemicals of any sorts, but a lot of times, you know, these teas are being made from the organic elements within their own ecosystem. That's not 1000% the case. You know, a lot of people hear like biodynamic and like, oh, it's the thing where they put the manure in the horn and they bury it in the ground and then like, magic happens. And the manure and the horn, that actually does happen. And, a lot of that has to do with the lunar cycle, but it is a little bit more about like the balance of the ecosystem, using the teas, making sure that, you're in line with the lunar system. You're doing things in accordance with that cycle. So your sprays happen. A lot of that has to do, some people say with, the way that water pulls, obviously, which plays into the lunar system. And I loved your quote, holistic, what did you say? Biodynamics would be your crystal wielding, sound bathing yogi friend. I think you wrote. That's kind of like one of my favorite ways to describe or one of my favorite ways to think about biodynamics. Is there anything on the biodynamic front?
No, I was just going to paint of course. I mean, we could talk about biodynamics and, people literally devote their whole life to it. But I think one of the things that I always think about is the first time I was in a vineyard and they were showing me how the teas were made. There's like actually quite a bit of science going into this. So to Amanda's point, there is like a little bit of extremely old practices being mixed with modern. So I really like to think of it not just like as a joke that it's your crystal wielding friend, but also in that way that we're looking at wellness today, like personal wellness, and that your friend might be looking to mindfulness. They might be looking to drinking natural teas that have herbs in them or Chinese medicine. And these are things that we have said, okay, they worked in the past, or Ayurvedic traditions, right? In our personal health. Yep. And that's a way that's what I mean when I say that with biodynamic, is that your friend is looking to the past, bringing it to the present, trying to bring technology to it, but it still might seem a little like far reaching for some people who are a little not used to these practices, I guess is the way to say it.
I mean, and I do think that, biodynamics does get a little bit of a reputation for being a little bit hippie and woo-woo, but the reality is like, the proof is in the pudding, right? Some of the most prominent vineyards and wineries in California, notably in Napa Valley, you've got Isley Vineyard, Larkmead Vineyards, Adamus, Rudd Estate that we're going to be tasting next week. I mean, these are very, very expensive wines, prime real estate in Napa Valley that have adopted biodynamics and have been doing so for a long time and believe in this. So, we're not just talking about, as we sort of semi-joked, your hippie friend next door, like this is a very real thing that, not just your hippie friend who's very mindful and cares a lot about what's going on. Like these are practices that are being adopted widely and broadly and by, the best there is out there. So, and we've got great representation for that today. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think this goes back to this wider trend that we've seen in wine and arguably like the last decade plus, which is people just saying, whether it's through natural, whether it's through viticulture, like whatever it is, there's different ways that people are going about saying, we no longer want wines to all taste one way. We really want an expression of terroir. We really want a sense of place. And most the winemakers, most of the winery owners I've met and talked to about biodynamics specifically say, look, it makes economic sense because I'm able to get the most expression out of my vineyard by making the wine in this way. That's what's working for me. But for somebody else, like we're going to talk about with Barra, that might be these more organic practices. And like we said last week, like if the economics aren't there, like these people aren't operating charities, they're operating businesses. So it needs to make sense. And that's what's, I think, just really heartening is sometimes economics and environmental best practices are at odds with each other. And in all of these things, organic, biodynamic, and sustainable, you can find ways, like real ways that do make economic sense and taste amazing. So I feel like maybe we should get into some tasting.
I would love to get into some tasting. And just on real quick on the biodynamic front, there is a certification process. Not everyone chooses to go through with that, but the certification would be the Demeter certification. That's the most widely adopted one. And Westwood is Demeter certified, which is one of the wines that we're going to be tasting today. But we'll kick it off with Barra, which is this gorgeous Petite Syrah that we've got here from Mendocino. You've been to Mendocino, right, Aida?
I have only driven through. Like y'all, I'm going to have to share with you another story some other time that basically we have like a long lost relative that we met through 23andMe and she lives in Mendocino. And so now I have committed to going to Mendocino this summer. And Amanda and I not only are drinking the Barra today, but also we're drinking Mendocino wines in our previous series that we did with California wines in the fall, when we did what grows together, goes together. And I just have this vision of Mendocino with like the greenest of green, almost like Irish green hills, and like animals wandering around, and just like everybody's chirping, almost like the beginning of Sleeping Beauty or whatever, or Snow White, where like all the animals are like helping the winemaker, like, let's pick the berries for you. And then they like flit off. So that's my vision of Mendocino, Amanda. That's probably not correct though.
I mean, it's not far off.
Okay.
Mendocino it's a really, really cool town. I'm looking forward to hearing how you like it. But I ask that because, I think as we think about a place like Mendocino, which if you go to Mendocino, not only is it beautiful, but it's a town devoid of any sort of like chain business, grocery store whose name you'd recognize. I mean, it really is back to earth, back to nature, very, very wellness and mindfulness oriented. So it's not really surprising that Mendocino has the amount of organically farmed and sustainably farmed vineyards that it does. Barra, like I had alluded to, Barra has been farming organically for quite some time. They were certified in the late 80s by the CCOF. And really, I mean, what I love about this particular wine is that it, you smell it, and it just like there is like a sense of place here. And I know we're not getting deep into, the tasting notes of these wines, but I love these wines because they always, like, you smell it and you're like, it smells like the grape. It smells like the place. This smells like Petite Syrah from Mendocino. And there is sort of like this purity of expression when we're talking about wines that are made in this way and farmed in this way, just sort of like without anything else, they're transparent, they're, void of any makeup or anything else. And they just kind of like show themselves. I don't know how you feel about it, but
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you on that. And I think what's so fun about California in particular when it comes to wine, and we talked about this a lot in the fall, is just we have such diversity of climates and microclimates across the state. Yep. And I think what my favorite thing is, over in my other world of Salt and Wind, we actually help arrange people's travel. And whenever they're coming to California, I say, instead of doing wine tasting just in one spot, like please road trip and try wines in different places, because then you're going to go back home and you're going to understand when it's in the glass, oh, well, I'm getting like forest flora, I'm getting some like cedar that I never would have gotten because, a redwood scent, because that's up in Mendocino, versus when we go down to Melville and go down towards Central Coast and you're like, oh, I'm getting some, saltiness or what have you. And I think that's, at least for me, as like the, sophomore wine learner, it helps me to like really paint a picture about what's actually happening in the glass.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about Barra and like what they're doing in terms of organic and sustainability, because, and where that line is and where the crossover is. Actually, let me pull up this Venn diagram so that we've been sort of like teasing out for a little bit now. There it is. Where's my share screen? Okay. The moment of truth. Okay. And Venn diagram. Here we go. Okay.
Okay.
So this is that Venn diagram that we were talking about, and very, very simple, but this is sort of the way that we want you to look at it, the way that we're looking at it, with sustainable wine growing, being on, that big circle there, and then organic and biodynamic. You can see that little tiny crossover here. I actually think that should be a lot bigger. I don't think it's enough of a crossover, but I do like how this looks, because I think I'm guilty of thinking about these three things in a tiered form versus a Venn diagram form, and this really helped to break that down for me.
Same.
Yeah, let's get out of here. Okay, I hope this is okay.
Yeah, all good.
Great. All right.
Tech
I'm
master.
a little nervous. Okay, so they're farming organically, so without any sort of synthetic chemicals. They're not going the route of biodynamics, but I think a lot of the things that they're doing, are biodynamic adjacent. So there is a lot
Yeah.
of mindfulness. And it was interesting because when I talked to her, without even prompting, because I was talking to Martha, without even prompting, she said, "Well, we're doing all these things, but we're also on the organic front." But she said, "We're also, we really love taking care of our employees and making sure that people are well cared for here." She said, they've got great housing on the property. She said, we've got tenured employees for like 30 plus years. And so those are the kinds of things that, you don't necessarily have to do if you're certified organic, but it's the right thing to do in the long run. That is what makes for great wine. Employees that are, care about the land, that are, making sure that they're invested. So they've got generations of people that are working at Barra who've been farming these grapes for years and years and years. And that falls under the sustainability camp. So, the two really sort of go hand in hand. I thought it was really sort of touching that she brought that up without me even asking about it. Because, not a lot of times, but sometimes when we talk about organic, we don't talk about the sustainability part of the equation. So that was my big takeaway from Barra and organics. As far as some of the other things that they're doing that are really, really important. We talk about topsoil, so cover
Yeah.
crops, are a huge part of that. So, they're planting things like beans, bell beans and peas, and that falls into the topsoil, and that, also falls under sustainability, right? Sustainability is taking care of our soil and making sure that we have a healthy environment, but that also falls under organic so that we're not spraying chemicals to ensure that, or, putting unnecessary things in the ground to ensure that, they're providing enough nutrients for the grapes. So that's, where some of the crossover can lie between organic and sustainable. Should we jump into the Westwood
Westwood. Yeah.
Pinot and
Yeah.
talk
And
a
I
little bit
think,
about biodynamics?
and I really think it's important to think about what Amanda just said, that when it comes to like wildlife habitat, soil health, pest management, you're going to kind of check the boxes across all three philosophies, right? So that's not really something, what we're talking about is the differences of how you implement those things. And then like we said last week, and Amanda was just alluding, that sustainability is going to kind of reach a little more holistically. I feel like sustainable is just that good neighbor policy. Like I'm going to be an integrated part of this, empower the people around me, and we're all going to move forward together as a collective. And that's a little bit more exactly what you're saying that Barra does. And I know both Westwood and Melville do this too. So this is not a one-time scenario. This is something a lot of these wineries are starting to do. So, but the Westwood, Amanda turned me on to Westwood last fall when I believe we tried their Pinot Noir last fall, but that was also, right? I'm forgetting.
Yes, we had their Pinot. We're having their Syrah today. I think I said having Pinot, but this is Syrah.
Yeah. No, so last fall we had the Pinot, which was also from Annadel Gap, and today we're doing the Syrah from Annadel Gap. So this area, I think it's important to think about. Just microclimate is a big piece of it for me, and what that means. So I know, Amanda, you said this last fall, but you were talking about just the winds and the direction that they come in, and just, can you paint the picture for us of Annadel Gap and how it's like a very unique place in terms of trying to implement all of these practices?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not the easiest vineyard to have taken biodynamic. It is quite windy there. They've got gorgeous soils though, so that does help things a little bit. They began their biodynamic certification process in the late 90s, and they were certified somewhere in the 2000s, and they are Demeter certified. So the vineyard itself, again, just to make that distinction, just like with Barra, the vineyard itself is certified biodynamic and organic for that matter. But the wine itself cannot be labeled as biodynamic or organic because of the way they're making it. Again, talking about those sulfites. This is the Atelier Melka team that's making this wine. Wine that I fell in love with before I even knew that they were farming. But it was just like a happy surprise when I was talking to Mayan Kajitsky, who is really the one who spearheads the Atelier Melka team, and we were in conversation. He was like, "Well, we farm biodynamically," and I was like, You do, like, it never would have occurred to me when I
Yeah.
picked up this class that like it doesn't lead, it's not put forward with that, but like they have so much information about why they chose to go biodynamic and organic, and it makes great sense. I mean, biodynamics, I think for me, um, really mean that there is a sense of care going on in the
Yeah.
vineyard that is just so deep. So where they can, and I have to say, like Mayan, they farm, or they, they're making wines from vineyards all across the state of California, and he's so mindful. But I think they're incredibly proud of the fact that they were able to take this vineyard biodynamic. Which is not an easy thing to do because it is just so windswept, and it is a little bit, it's not so wet. We're going to talk about
Yeah.
well, Melville in a
We'll
second,
address that in 1 minute. Yeah.
yeah. But I'm impressed that they were able to do it. So a couple places where I think
So Amanda, I'm just gonna like ask you to press pause and just explain briefly like why I think if everybody remembers this like entity kind of, I hesitate to say closed loop, but like that system that we were talking about biodynamic being. Yeah. So why would wind be an issue when it comes to biodynamic?
Yeah, I mean, wind is definitely going to stress the vines a little bit. It's going to put pressure on them in a way that makes it so, things like disease, things like there's a whole slew of things that wind can do. Wind is a good thing as long as you have really good, healthy vines to support it. And that's probably the biggest thing. Like, we like windswept areas because a lot of times it can cool off the grapes and it can lead to thicker skins and more flavor development. But if the vine isn't healthy and strong enough to withstand those things, well, then they're not going to survive in the wind. So really it's more of a not a backwards look at it, but yeah, I mean, you got to have strong, healthy, deep-rooted vines in order to withstand that kind of, the kind of wind that this place is getting.
And then is there also the issue, because I know this happens over on the rest of the agriculture world, that it would be that much harder to get certification because if you had wind coming in, you might get pesticides actually being wind swept over if there was a vineyard adjacent. I know at least in the Midwest, this is a big issue for places that are like, trying to be organic corn versus not. I don't know how much that plays into vineyards, but I imagine that when you're actually trying to get the certification versus not, maybe that's an issue. I don't know. Maybe somebody can help us out with that one. I'm going beyond my own knowledge about wind and biodynamics. So I'll just
it's all good. Yeah, it's probably going a little bit beyond where my skill set lies, but I'm happy. What I'll do is I'll check in with Mayan about that after, and I'll leave a comment on here about how because it's a good point, and I think it is something that people think about. If the vineyard adjacent to us is not farming organically and biodynamically, how does that affect what's happening in our own vineyard? But the big thing here is, like we said, teas, manures, topsoils, really taking care of the environment all around us. It's a little bit like, if we think about what we put in our bodies and making sure that we're staying healthy, it's like, it's also considering our environment. Are we getting enough natural sunlight? Like, are we working out enough? Like, are we surrounding ourselves with people that are giving us good vibes? Are we comfortable? Are we getting enough sleep? So it's not enough just to put good things in your body. Like, you have to think about the other environmental factors as well. And that's really how I think about biodynamics. And I know that's how, most of the wineries that are certified biodynamic or, practicing biodynamically think about it as well.
And also, I mean, I really liked how you said that that this winery in particular shows that this stereotype that we were talking about earlier of being like a little bit hippie or a little bit woo-woo is really kind of dated and doesn't really apply anymore. And I mean, this is more like the gentleman kind of vineyard than it is anything close to that, right? I mean, we're talking a little more chic than Birkenstocks and prayer beads.
Definitely a little bit more chic. I mean, like I said, Atelier Melka, Philippe Melka is known for making some of the most high scoring wines in California. We won't even begin to rattle off the list. Google. But yes, his Atelier Melka team is responsible for this wine. And yes, this is definitely on the more, if we think of, wines that don't necessarily fit the mold of like what we think of as like of people like walking into like natural food stores. And I hate to stereotype, but like, if we think of that stereotype, they don't necessarily fit the mold. But I also
Yeah.
love that like the mold is broken. I mean, there is
Yeah.
no mold for what this looks like any longer. It is. And I loved John Williams from Frog Leap used to talk about this all the time. He was like, you have to understand, like back in the 90s, like nobody was doing this stuff. We were all just hippies back then. And I was like, yeah, I guess I never really thought about it that way.
Yeah.
One of the things that Westwood says that I love though, as it pertains to sustainability, because, as we think about these organic and biodynamic with regard to sustainability, at the very, very top of their site, it says certified biodynamic and organic wines. Sustainability is at the core of our soil and our soul. And really this is what I love. It's not just one and done. It's not just, okay, we're farming organically. Okay, we're farming biodynamically. I think once you look at the whole picture, you realize that the three are actually really important and can work together. And sustainability is not something that should be, left to the side. It's not something that should necessarily be done on its own. But I love how these are working together in a place like Westwood.
Yeah, and I think
really,
that
really
just
cool.
goes back to, I feel like you're just going to keep hearing some recurring themes and statements from us over the course of these 5 episodes in the series. But one of the ones that, this really goes back to is this idea of if all of these concepts were a human, the idea of embracing meditation or mental wellness, and that is actually a lifelong goal. And that is not something that like you actually hit one day and then you're just freaking Buddha and enlightened. And that's the same thing with all of these things, is like constant. And I know that can sound tiresome, but what it means is that everybody's pushing forward together, and that coming up with new ways to do these things better, more efficiently. And, it makes the soil and the greater environment healthier the more people that are adopting these practices.
Yep.
Now I'm ready to head on.
The only thing I'm going to do is just show this really cool
please.
image of the biodynamic infographic, so people can see it briefly, and then they can go and dive deeper on it themselves. This is Westwood's Westwood Estate's biodynamic calendar. So when we were talking about these sprays that happen across the entire year, you can see here, what they're spraying and why they're doing it. And I will say, I've actually done a spray before, and it was the most wild experience because I walked around Red Estate, who we're going to be tasting next week. I walked around Red Estate with the backpack. It was like this seemingly innocuous, not seemingly, it was an innocuous fluid that like looked like water. And like, I think it was mixed with, it had like it was like bone. It was like crushed bone. And we were just like, we had to spray it in the morning, and we were just like walking around, like spraying the things. But it had to be done, according to this calendar. And that's really, when we look at this calendar here, you'll see what is happening when and why. And so these are, you see biodynamic preparations here. These are the actual sprays that are happening. So there's no chemicals. And a lot of times, you'll actually see it over here, the cow horns buried with the BD500 ingredients. That's the manure that we were talking about before. This is a subject probably that requires a lot more. How do I put this? Someone that's got more of a skill set and a knowledge base. Yeah. So I understand
more specialization than us. Yeah,
exactly. And maybe that's for another time. But I just wanted you guys to see this here to get an idea of what we're talking about with regard to biodynamics, because it really has a lot to do with the lunar cycle, where the vine is in its life according to the season, what's being sprayed, and how they're doing it. So there you go. Now you can go in Westwood and it's pretty cool.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So our last one is from Melville, which I feel like Melville, I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, I think Melville's Pinot Noir is the first Pinot Noir when I was like possibly not even of age, when I tried it and was, in classes. I'm not saying I was drinking underage, just to be clear.
Sure.
But in school, I think I remember trying it and saying like, this is phenomenal. This is the great Pinot Noir. Like this is like, it clicked for me. And my like very young version of a wine lover was realizing that concept of like sense of place was really a true thing that you could have in the glass. So for me, that's what Chad and the team at Melville achieved for me when I was younger. So a toast to
I love that you have a little connection to Melville. Chad and I have communicated on Instagram for some time now, and when we were putting this together, I I really wanted to include this wine, and I looked at what the topics were, and I was like, well, we're talking about biodynamic and organic, and I messaged him and I was like, hey, I was like, I know that you do all these things. Are you
yeah.
certified? And he was like, let's hop on the phone and talk. So I got on the phone with him and he was like, so we do all the things, but we're not certified. And the reason that they're not certified, and this is, probably as we wrap up, one of the other big takeaways that I want to impart on you is that though a wine doesn't necessarily, and I know that you alluded to this earlier, though a wine doesn't necessarily say that it is certified organic, or made using certified organic grapes or made using certified biodynamic grapes, though a wine doesn't necessarily say that on the label, it doesn't mean that they are not practicing that way. And that was the reason for this inclusion, because Chad knows his vineyard inside and out. He knows, he treats them like his children. And when we were talking, one of my big like aha moments was he said, one of the issues with the organic certification is that, it's a little bit prescriptive in what you have to spray and when. And he said, because of where we are in Santa Barbara, in Santa Rita Hills, we are not a lot, we're coastal, right? So a lot of times what happens is, our vines don't need the things or want the things that the organic certification is saying that we have to spray. And he said, I look at this and I go, it's just sort of like putting a bunch of health foods in your refrigerator and then feeding them to your children, even though maybe they're celiac, maybe they're allergic to certain things. Maybe, that's not, even though it's organic, maybe it doesn't work for them because, they're whatever adverse, or, it's not what they need at this stage in the game. And that's sort of how he thinks about his vines is, even though all the foods in the pantry, all the foods in the fridge might be really healthy and organic and filled with nutrients, it may just not be what those vines need right now at this moment in their life. And that was a really big moment for me where I was like, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. The other, big, not criticism, I should say, isn't the right word, but a lot of times when we're thinking about sustainability as it pertains to organic, especially certified organic, is a lot of times, and this is a conversation that I had with Mayan Kajitsky, who makes Westwood. About a month ago, I was out walking the vineyards with him, and he was pointing to a couple different things, and he said, I'd asked him, hey, is this certified organic? He said, no. He said, I'll tell you why. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, he said, do you see how big this vineyard is right here? And I said, yeah. And he said, do you know that if we had to spray the amount of times that we would have to in order to be certified organic, he said the damage that would do to the soil, the emissions that would come out of the tractor while we had to do those 15 passes mandated per week or whatever the number was. He said, we are looking at the whole picture here. We're not just like, and to us it was, do we necessarily want the certified organic certification, that stamp of approval, or do we want to do right by the land, by the environment, by the grapes, by the people that are inhabiting this land, because that's really what it comes down to. And he said, the answer in that situation was no. And of course, we know that he is working with some vineyards that are certified organic, that are certified biodynamic. So I think it's really important to look at, or to talk to everyone to figure out, maybe why they're not doing those things before we write them off, and to understand that sustainability plays a huge, huge factor. And in some cases, like when I was talking to Mayan about this particular vineyard, it was really the driving force behind why they chose not to get certified, because they didn't want to impact the environment in a negative way. And that would have been the antithesis of what we're talking about when we're talking about sustainability. So I think it's interesting. I'm so glad that we were able to include Melville. I love what they do there. They are so, so mindful. Chad is one of the most knowledgeable people out there when it comes to the health of vines and the health of their soils, and making sure that things are being done in a sustainable fashion, not just doing things for the sake of like checking a box, which is not to imply that everyone is or anyone is, but I think sometimes that's, that may be a little bit tempting. But, I encourage you, all of these wineries are, really, really open to conversation. I think most of them are. And now that we've got a two-way street in the form of places like Instagram and Facebook,
Yeah.
chat with these wineries, find out what they're doing. Even we talked about last week with the certification, if sustainable is something that matters to you, let them know, but also, have that conversation with them before you look, or maybe after you look at the label to say, that's interesting. I always thought that I thought they would have done, the right things. Well, a lot of times they probably are, they're just maybe not, they're not talking, they don't have room on the label.
Yeah. Again, like we said, 80% of these wines in the state are certified sustainable. There are also wineries that, as we alluded to last week, they're too small to take on the economic burden of, or they don't have the manpower on their team to go through all the things to become certified organic, sustainable, or biodynamic. And I think what's been helpful for me as I've gone on my own journey of learning about wine is, again, visiting the places and thinking about not just the individual wineries, but the AVA or the region as a whole. And as the more you get to know Santa Barbara, you might think, oh, Santa Barbara is fancy in downtown and people are chic and all these things. And you might not realize, you might for some reason not associate that with, oh, they're also being sustainable and organic and all this. But the whole region of Santa Barbara really looks at farming as a whole. And when you travel around there and you realize this is the way the farmers markets are operating, there's horses being raised over here, these people are, and then you realize the wineries are part of a greater agricultural system and the wineries are working together. This is not some competitive thing where I'm more biodynamic than you are. This is, let's all be reaching a greater good together. And I love that you pulled up this screenshot, Amanda. This is on the Melville site. And not only do we just love, I'm a sucker for illustrated anything, but I think this really, really helps you understand how unique Santa Barbara is as a location, and specifically the Santa Rita Hills.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, the reason I pulled up this map was I wanted to show you just, how close we are to the Pacific Ocean here and the ocean influence that we're having on these vineyards, and how that can play a role in whether or not, a vineyard is able to practice, get certified, and maybe why they wouldn't get certified as organic or biodynamic, but could still be operating sustainably with those things in mind. So I just wanted to show you sort of the proximity. This is on their website. I highly recommend, just take a peek at it. If only to,
and I will say,
satisfy your creative urge.
and I think, and again, not to just keep referring to these wineries' websites, but one of the quotes that Amanda and I really liked that they actually have on Melville, I'm going to read it to you. I have not memorized it, is, at the time of harvest, we consider the wines to already be made and we strive not to interfere with their natural path. And so this is going back to this concept of letting the wines, letting the location, right? All this expression, not playing around with it too much, and also doing the best to make it be its fullest. So I feel like it's ideal parenting, right? Raising your child to be their best, most empowered person. That's what these winemakers are doing. And for some of them, it's biodynamic, some of them it's sustainable, some of them it's organic, and some of them, like the Venn diagram we showed you, all of those could be happening simultaneously. They are not at odds with each other.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad. I'm glad you put it that way, because I was like, oh yeah, that's a pretty good way of putting it. We raise our kids and we live as humans to be the best possible versions of ourselves. And I think, if we think about sustainability from that angle, it's a really, really sort of insightful way to think about it. So silly us thinking that we would be, in that 30-minute mark today with biodynamic and organic.
Too much to talk about.
Too much to say. So. I
but I will.
Oh yeah, we'll get it in a little.
Yeah, we're we're gonna do it faster. No, sorry. There's so much to talk about, and Amanda and I are both. I mean, Amanda is much farther along in the journey than I am. But being on this journey, you start to realize there's so much to unpack, and like we said, there's other people who are more niche experts at these things we talked about. And so we encourage you to look into them further, whether that's the Demeter certification, the CCOF website, or discovercaliforniawines.com actually shares a ton of information. I cannot emphasize how much great info there is on there about all these things we're talking about. And I know, we've been trying to give you kind of our takeaways and our recap, of our experience today. And for me, it just makes me realize that the same way that if you're going to be a wine lover, you need to be actively using your senses when you're in front of a glass, right? You need to use your nose, your sight, right? Your taste. We know this. So we encourage you to also actively be researching these wineries and realize it's a constant journey you need to go on. And for me, that's something that I already was doing when it came to like the grape and the way it was grown, all these things, but I wasn't really doing that when it came to sustainability. And the reality is I do this when it comes to my cosmetics. I do this when it comes to my other food. And this has made me realize like I want to put dollars behind these wineries that are doing things I believe in, especially when the wine tastes the way I want it to, and it's phenomenal, and it's like good quality, so it's a win-win. Yeah. So for me, that takeaway is it's a constant journey that I need to actively be involved in, and I hope you all are too.
I think that's a great takeaway, and you're right. It is something that I think about in all other aspects of my life, so it makes perfect sense that I would think about it with wine, since that is such a big part of my life. You know, for me, living and working in Napa Valley, as we talked about, I think last week, you start to put things into perspective in a way that I didn't necessarily have the opportunity to when I wasn't living in Napa Valley. So, and even living there, you know, you hear words like sustainable, and immediately you're like, well, you know, organic and biodynamic, that has to be better than sustainable, right? Like that has to be the next step. And I am fully guilty of thinking that way, of probably telling people that was the way it was. And this journey of learning about sustainability as it relates to all these other things has really put some things into perspective for me. That Venn diagram, you know, really showcase those things, talking to people like Mayan who were like, well, this is the reason that we're not certified, because we're taking into account sustainability. So I don't know. I think, you know, I love diving deeper. I love that I have more questions to ask of the winemakers and the wineries every time I'm visiting. And I hope that you have more questions to ask too, and feel empowered to ask those questions. They're important questions. You know, the linear thinking of, are you certified organic? Are you certified biodynamic? I think, you know, I have to sort of tweak that into thinking about, you know, what are you doing holistically? What are we doing across the board? Are we taking into account all of these other things? You know, helps us to not only inform ourselves, but inform our drinking and inform our buying choices. So
yeah, I feel like maybe the question we should all be asking is, what sustainable practices are you putting in place or actively going after, instead of just being so prescriptive about it? And actually, just another reminder that this whole month, Daring Down to Earth month, CaliforniaWines.com has a ton of information about, DiscoverCaliforniaWines.com has a ton of information about tastings that are happening virtually. So you can learn actively about this right now if you want to go on there and join some of these tastings. So you know, it's there for you all month of April. So dive deep and let us know what you learned. We'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I thank you for pointing that out. DiscoverCaliforniaWines.com has all the info, and we will be back next week, same time, same place, talking about animals, actually, and probably diving a little. One thing that we didn't touch on today, and probably like for good reason, because we get a whole week to talk about animals, is how animals play a role in the vineyard. And so much of that is going to play into sustainability, biodynamics especially. You know, a lot of these biodynamically farmed vineyards are using animals, and they're play a critical role in making biodynamics possible. So we're spending a whole week on it. So I hope you are ready for all the cute animal shots and some delicious wines as well. Aida, thank you for being with me here today. It is such a pleasure to be on this journey with you, learning all things sustainability. And I look forward to diving even deeper next week.
Okay, well, see y'all next week.
All right, bye.